Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. I'm back with part 9 of the Women in the Bible series. So we're wrapping things up and I'm getting closer to the end. After this video, I'm expecting the last one will be Esther for the Old Testament. And then after that will be into the New Testament. Now, I just want to say I did not expect that it was going to be dragged out this far, but obviously things are happening in life. The summer was very, very busy, but I'm still continuing on, so I'm hoping that you are staying tuned and enjoying everything. And so this is part 9, and I'm going to dive right in talking about the widow woman. So the widow woman, her husband passed away. Oh, before I get into that, Elisha, in part 8, we talked about Elijah. Elijah was taken into heaven, and Elisha got the anointing passed down to him from Elijah. So now Elisha is taking on all the things that Elijah was doing. So in this situation, the widow woman went to Elisha and told him about how her husband had passed away. She had 2 sons, and now creditors were coming to try to enslave her sons if she didn't pay back her husband's debt. She went to Elisha and she asked, like, what can I do? I need help with this situation. And the widow woman explained to Elisha that the only thing she had was a flask of oil, a flask of olive oil. It was probably a very small container. He told her to get all the jars that she could, collect as many jars as you can from your house, from your neighbors, everybody you know, have them bring you all their jars, pour the oil into those jars. So that's what they did. Her and her sons got all the jars from all the people that they knew. She started to pour the oil, and what I'm imagining is that she's pouring the oil into one jar. Once it's full, they kind of like pull that jar away and put the next one under. And as long as there were jars, there was oil still flowing out of that flask. And she was able to fill up all these jars. He told her, sell the oil that you collect, pay off the debt, and then live off the rest. And that's exactly what she did. So his blessing over the situation allowed that to happen. That was a miracle. And she was able to pay the debt and still live on after that. And as far as I know, this woman was just called the widow woman. And now we're getting into the woman from Shunem, the woman of Shunem. Still no name for her, but she had a husband. She was a wealthy woman. And so this wealthy woman lived in the town of Shunem with her husband, and Elisha would pass through the town. And I guess one of the times when he passed through, she invited him to her home for a meal. And then after a while, every time he would pass through, he would stop at her house to eat. And so the woman made a suggestion to her husband that they build a room on their roof for Elisha so that he would have a place to stay every time he passed through the town. So they built the room and they put in there a bed, a chair, a table, and a lamp just for him, so he would have that. And so he did stay, and he came and brought his servant with him. His servant's name was Gehazi. Elisha was so happy and grateful for the woman doing this for him. He asked if there was anything he could do for her. And so she said, well, no, my family takes very good care of me. There's nothing that I really need. So he still wanted to, reciprocate the favor. Elisha wanted to pay her back. So he was asking, like, what can we do for her? And Gehazi said, well, she doesn't have any children, and her husband is very old. So Elisha said, go get the woman, bring her to me. And when the woman came to him, Elisha told her, by this time next year, you will be holding your son. She's like, really? Like, don't say these things and get my hopes up and then it doesn't happen. Like, I don't want to be hopeful for something that I didn't even ask for this, but don't trick me. Like, don't tease me with this kind of like blessing or this great news and then it not actually be true. Of course, she basically didn't want to get her hopes up for nothing, but eventually she did have a son. So the promise from Elisha came true. Her son got older, and one day he was working with his father in the field and with some of the other harvesters, and he got a headache. And so because he had the headache, his dad had one of the servants bring him back home to his mother. His mother was holding him on her lap, and she held him till about 12 o'clock. I guess it said a little after noon or around noon, and the boy did end up passing away. So he died from that, and the woman carried her son up to Elisha's room and laid him on the bed. Of course, she's distraught and everything, so she decides she's gonna go and seek out Elisha's help with this, because this is the boy that you told me I was going to have. So I need to come find you to figure out what we can do about this. So the woman sent a message to her husband to send her a servant and a donkey, because she was going to go find the man of God. And I guess there were only certain times in the year where you would go to seek out the man of God. So her husband was like, well, it's not the new moon festival. It's not the Sabbath. Why are you going? And her response to him was, it shall be well, or it'll be all right. So she saddled her donkey and she told her servant, drive the donkey and do not slow down. Like, we're not playing around right now. I need to get to the man of God, and it's urgent. So now she's approaching Mount Carmel. That's where Elisha was. And Elisha could see her from a distance approaching. So he sent Gehazi out to meet her. So Gehazi's like, is everything okay? He asked about her, like, how are you? How's your son? How's your husband? And her response to him was, it's well, or everything's fine. So it's like she knew, you really can't help me. So in faith, she was expressing that everything's fine, everything is well, but at the same time, you're not the person that I need to talk to anyway. So she bypassed Gehazi and went and found Elisha. She fell to the ground at his feet, and Gehazi now is there. He's attempting to move her off of his feet and kind of like push her away. And Elisha's like, no, don't move her. She's deeply troubled, but the Lord hasn't revealed to me what it is. She immediately started to talk, and she's like, did I ask you for a son? Like, you told me I was going to have a son, and I didn't ask for this son. This was something that was given to me. And now, like I said, I didn't want you to trick me, and something happened. So now it's like she's pushing it back on Elisha. Like, this isn't supposed to be happening, him dying. So Elisha quickly moves into fix-it mode. So he tells Gehazi, take my staff, get on the donkey, and go to the boy and lay the staff on the boy's face. So Gehazi gathers himself together, and Elisha tells him, don't stop to talk to anybody on the way. This is go time. You got to get there. So he sends him ahead, and the woman tells Elisha, I'm not going home unless you come with me. So Elisha realized that he needed to go too. So they go to the house. Gehazi gets there first because he had already left. He did lay the staff on the boy's face, and nothing happened. He came out of the house, and as he's coming out of the house, Elisha and the woman are coming up to the house together. And Gehazi confirms, like, this boy is dead. So Elisha knows that he has to go in and intervene and do something himself. When Elisha went up to the room, he went into the room and closed the door, and he started to pray. And then he stretched himself over the boy. So eyes to eyes, mouth to mouth, and hands to hands. He was over the boy. And as he did that, the boy's body started to get warm. So Elisha got up and he walked back and forth across the room one time. And then he stretched himself over the boy another time. And this time when he got up, the boy sneezed 7 times, and then he opened his eyes. And then once the boy was up and revived, Elisha told Gehazi, go get his mother. She came up and she bowed to Elisha in gratitude, and he told her, take your son. She picked him up and carried him downstairs. So he had revived, he was back to life, and another miracle was performed. And then as some time went by, Elisha got word from the Lord that a famine was coming. And he told the woman, you and your family need to go to another land. There's going to be a famine in this land, and it's going to last for 7 years. So you're going to have to go live somewhere else. So her and her family picked up and they moved to the land of the Philistines, and they stayed there for the full 7 years. And then once the famine was over, the woman wanted to come back and reclaim her home and her land and different things. So she went to approach the king. And when she went to the king, Gehazi happened to be in there talking to the king. The king had called Gehazi in, and he's like, tell me some stories of the great miraculous things that Elisha has done. So as Gehazi was there telling different stories, he ended up telling the story about how Elisha raised this boy back from the dead. And as he's telling the story, the woman comes in. So Gehazi is like, oh, this is her. This is the woman right here. So the king is like, is this true? So she confirmed it. and she ended up telling the story herself. Because the king was so happy for her and happy for the story and the blessing that she received, he told his officials to see to it that she get all of the things that she left behind. Not only was she to get her home and her land back, but she was to get the value of any crops that were harvested while she was gone. So she got blessed again. And that's the story of the woman from Shunem. That's the way it was written in the note that I found. I don't know if she's called the Shunammite woman or the woman from Shunem, but that's her story. And now next is a woman named Athaliah. She ended up being queen. She reigned over Judah for a period of time. She had a son named Ahaziah, and Ahaziah was king for a little while before Athaliah took over. So Ahaziah was reigning over Judah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, just like Ahab and his family. And so Ahaziah kind of got tripped up into that same lifestyle through marriage. So, and then later he ended up passing away. And now Athaliah, for whatever reason, she's like tearing the royal family apart. So she's going around and killing people, apparently. So Ahaziah's sister decides to rescue Ahaziah's son, Joash. And Joash's mother, her name was Zibiah, and she was from Beersheba. Apparently, Joash must have been an infant, because when Ahaziah's sister rescued him, she hid him in a room, him and his nurse, in a bedroom of the palace or wherever they lived, and he stayed hidden for 6 years. And now, because of the death of Ahaziah, Athaliah became queen, so she was reigning over Judah. But the people wanted to revolt against her. They didn't want her in charge. And Jehoiada, he was a priest in the land, and apparently he got word of Joash being alive. So the people are revolting against Queen Athaliah, and Jehoiada brings Joash out. And at this time, he's 7 years old. So that's why I'm guessing he must have been an infant, a 1-year-old, when the sister hid him away, because now he's 7. He's being crowned the king. The people are all excited. They're for it. They want Athaliah out. Athaliah hears all the rejoicing, all the trumpets and the shouting from the people. She comes out and sees this happening, and she starts to tear her clothes, and she's yelling treason and all of these things, and Jehoiada has her sent away and killed. So now Joash is in charge. He's the reigning king at the age of 7, and Athaliah is gone. Now we're moving on to the next woman. It's a woman named Huldah. She was a prophet, a woman prophet now. And Hilkiah, he's the high priest, he found a scroll, and the scroll was said to be the book of the law. The scroll was read, and I guess it had some negative things in there against the people and how they were appearing in God's eyes. And so Hilkiah had a man named Shaphan bring the scroll to the king. And now the king at this time was Josiah. And when he read the scroll, there must have been such negative things that Josiah tore his clothes in despair and sad because of what he read. And the tearing of the clothes was like a thing. So if you tear your clothes, that means you are like feeling a deep emotion, usually a sad or enraged emotion. So he tore his clothes in despair, and then he sent Shaphan and some other men down to the temple and gave them the order to get more details about what was written in the scroll. So they went and sought out Huldah. Huldah was married to a man named Shalom. And so Huldah read the scroll, and she provided this feedback to send back to the people, that the Lord was mad at the people because they had abandoned the Lord and they were worshiping idols. They were offering sacrifices to pagan gods. And the Lord was angry, God was angry, and he was going to bring disaster on the people. Huldah was, I guess, advised about what the king did when he read the scroll and how he tore his clothes in despair. So her message was that Josiah would not be impacted by this. Like, the wrath of God wasn't going to happen while Josiah was alive. It would happen once he passed on. So that was a little bit of consolation there, that they had a time of reprieve. And because of Josiah's tearing up his clothes and his weeping and sorrow, I guess there was more to it that wasn't mentioned before. But she said because of all these things, you won't receive the judgment. It'll happen once you die. And he would be buried, not only just buried, but in peace. Like, you're okay, but now the wrath is coming. And so, of course, they took that message back to the king, and that was that. Huldah was a woman, and she was a prophet. And they were seeking out her wisdom, her counsel, and she gave her advice. So that's a major role, a prophet. And the book of Job, I know a lot of people know about Job, but he suffered many afflictions. His livestock, all his animals, his farm hands, his servants, his sons and daughters were all killed. And then he was afflicted with a severe illness, like boils on the skin. And Job's wife saw him suffering, and her suggestion to him was to curse God and die. Now, she doesn't have a name, but that's what she's mentioned to do. And Job kind of checked her. He's like, woman, you sound foolish. He told her that. And then he said, are we only supposed to accept good things from God and not bad? And needless to say, he didn't take her advice. He did not curse God and die. He actually recovered from his illness and other good things happened. But just wanted to mention Job's wife and how her advice was to curse God and die. No, he wasn't doing that. And now the book of Jeremiah talks about wailing women. Jeremiah was grieving over sinful Judah because they were unfavorable in the eyes of the Lord because of all the things that they were doing, all the sinful activities, whatever they were. And so Jeremiah's advice was to call for the women who weep and cry at funerals and have them weep and cry over Judah in prayer. And he told them to teach their daughters how to weep and wail. And he told them to teach each other how to lament. Weeping women, crying women, women who know how to get a prayer through, who are good at that. That's something that the Lord will hear from. It's obviously shows that was a desirable thing to do, to weep and wail over situations, to cry out to God. And there were specific women that were good at that, and they could learn to do it. So just another little piece of information that we can use in our lives as well. So now I guess there are some women who are like false prophets, because Ezekiel gives a warning to these women who were false prophets, who were telling people lies and had magic charms, tricking people, deceiving them, and prophesying from their own imaginations. I don't know what that situation was, but I have to mention it because it involved some women, and I guess they were doing the wrong thing, and Ezekiel issued a warning to them to stop. And now Ezekiel 23, I read this in the New Living Translation, and it is very disturbing. What I read was disturbing, especially in the New Living Translation. I'll just put that there if anybody wants to read through that. But it gives a metaphor of two sisters. The King James Version spells the names with an A at the beginning, like it starts with an A. But the New Living Translation that I usually read from has the name spelled with an O. So I'm just going to put the words obviously at the bottom like I've been doing. So the names are Oholah and Ohilibah. Now these are sisters. They're metaphors. They're actually not real women, but they're metaphors for a land of people. One is considered to be the older sister, and the other one is the younger sister. So the older sister is Oholah. She represents Samaria or Israel, because Israel was the 10 tribes. So everything started with the 12 tribes of Israel, but way back things were divided, but they didn't divide evenly. So Israel ended up being the 10 tribes, and then Judah is represented by the younger sister, and that was Ohilibah. I'm going to put things on the screen to make it easier. Israel was richer, more tribes, more population. They were greater in power and in riches. So Oholah, being the older sister, represents the greater. And the younger sister, Ohilibah, represents Judah or Jerusalem, which was the two other tribes. Israel, the greater tribe, is way less favorable in the Lord's eyes than Judah. Judah is okay. Like, God is still looking at them in a good place. Oholah means her tent or her tabernacle. And the meaning behind that name was because God was not with Israel. He didn't dwell there. So her tent or tabernacle means she is herself. She is by herself. God is not with them. She is on her own. And Ohilibah means my tent or my tabernacle is in her. And this was represented because the temple of the Lord was in Judah and the Lord dwelt there. So one was her tent, her tabernacle. The other one was my tent or tabernacle is in her. So those are the two sisters. And in this book of Ezekiel, chapter 23, they are talked about in a very negative way. They're compared to prostitutes and adulterous women. And it describes how they let all these other lands, these other people kind of like ravage them in the same way like a prostitute would seek out men and be defiled by them. Basically saying how Israel and Judah had defiled themselves, and they were compared by using the two sisters or these two women to represent the places. You can read it, of course. Go read it for yourself. It bothered me a little bit, but you know, it's in there, so that's all part of it. And it talks about how the Lord's judgment was going to come down on these two sisters, of course, Judah and Israel. They were accused of adultery and murder. So adultery by worshiping idols, and murder by offering their children as sacrifices, like literally burning their kids as sacrifices to these idols. And the chapter goes on to describe the Lord's judgment on the actions of these sisters. Those are two women. I have to just talk about them because they were named, like given a human name. They're not real women, but I'm just going to include them here. The next woman that I want to talk about is Ezekiel's wife. We don't know what her name is, or at least not from what I read. But Ezekiel's wife ends up dying, and the Lord tells him that he can't mourn for her. He can't publicly mourn. Like, he can weep inside, cry inside, but he can't go do the normal rituals of mourning or like publicly mourn the way people did back then. He had to do everything in silence. He had to just go on as if nothing ever happened. And so that was his plight, and it represented how the people needed to do the same thing. The Lord was angry with the way the people were living, so he decided he was going to defile the temple, and he was going to destroy their sons and daughters. And the way they were to respond to those actions is the same way that Ezekiel responded to his wife dying. They couldn't publicly mourn. They had to do everything in silence. They couldn't do any of the mourning rituals, same exact thing. So they had to kind of like waste away. That's what it said, waste away because of their sins. Okay, now we're moving on to the book of Hosea. Hosea was told to marry a prostitute, and this was supposed to represent the Lord and how he was going to be with the people that had turned against him. So Hosea married a prostitute. Her name was Gomer, and they had 3 children that are named. I don't know if there was other kids. She was supposed to be a prostitute because she would apparently have children in prostitution, which I don't think any of them are named unless there's another section that talks about this. I'm just going to stick with what I know. Her first son was named Jezreel. Then she had a daughter named Loruma. And then they had a third child, which was their second son, and his name was Loami. Each of the children's names represent something, so I'm going to put on the screen what they mean. But they had special meaning because everything that was happening with Hosea and Gomer being even together was all representative of something else or something greater. So the names of the children represented something as well. And then the significance, as I mentioned, was to show how the Lord still loved Israel, that he was going to reunite with them. So at a point, Gomer went back into prostitution while she was married to Hosea, and she lived kind of like a filthy life. But then the Lord had Hosea to go and win her back. So Hosea got Gomer back, brought her home, set her back up, was caring for her, took her out of prostitution, and he told her she wasn't to sleep with anyone, including him. And this was to represent the fact that Israel was going to go a long time without a king or a prince, without worshiping idols, and then eventually they would devote themselves back to God. And now I'm getting to Zechariah. Now this is something about a woman and some other women, but it's just very strange. So I'm just going to say whatever I know about it. And if I learn about any more details about what this all means, I will add it to the description box below. I'm pretty sure some commentators will try to decipher what this means. So I will add their notes to the bottom if I do find something. But in the book of Zechariah now, Zechariah is there with an angel, and apparently there's something like coming towards him. He asks, what is that? The angel tells him it's a basket for measuring grain, that the basket is filled with all the sins of everyone in the land. And there's a heavy lead lid on the basket. The lid lifts up, and there's a woman sitting inside the basket. And the angel tells Zechariah that the woman's name is Wickedness. And then he pushes her back into the basket and closes the lid back. And then the next thing that happens is Zechariah looks up and he sees two women flying, gliding through the wind, and they had wings like a stork. And they flew down and picked up the basket and then flew into the sky. And Zechariah asked the angel, where are they taking the basket? And the angel says they're taking the basket to Babylonia, and they're going to build a temple there for the basket. And the angel says when the temple is ready, they'll set the basket on its pedestal. And that's the end of the story. So again, women are involved, so they have to be talked about. I have to mention them, but I don't know what this story means. I didn't do any additional research on it. I just want to tell it exactly how it's written. And like I said, if I find any commentaries, I will put them below. I don't really like messing with commentaries like that. But for this, I'm just curious to see what somebody thought this meant. So again, that'll be there. And part 10 is coming soon. It'll be Esther, and then we'll be done with the Old Testament. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.